He stood in the witness box at Nuremberg and calmly admitted to murdering 90,000 people. No shame, no tears, no hesitation. Just numbers, recited like a grocery list. That man was Otto Ohlendorf. And in less than an hour, you're going to understand exactly why the world decided he had to hang. Welcome back to X History, the channel where we don't just tell you what happened. We show you why it happened and why it still matters today. Because some stories aren't meant to be comfortable, they're meant to be remembered. And Otto Ohlendorf's story. It's one of the most chilling proofs in human history that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a father, an economist, a man who loved his children. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand something most documentaries never explain properly. How an ordinary man became responsible for one of the largest death tolls of the entire Holocaust. Before we go further, if stories like this matter to you, stories that refuse to let history repeat itself in silence, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're not done, not even close. Let's rewind to 1907, a small German village. A boy is born into a farming family, nothing dark, nothing sinister, just an ordinary childhood. Otto Ohlendorf was smart, frighteningly smart. He studied law and economics, and by his 20s, he was already being noticed by powerful men. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Ohlendorf wasn't some street thug who joined the Nazi Party out of hatred. He joined because he believed in an idea, a twisted, dangerous idea, that Germany could be rebuilt through order, ideology, and control. And that belief would soon cost tens of thousands of innocent lives. By the 1930s, Ohlendorf had risen inside the SD, the intelligence branch of the SS. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't especially violent by nature, according to those who knew him. He was a bureaucrat, a planner, a man who filed reports and studied economic policy, which makes what happens next even more disturbing. Because in 1941, Adolf Hitler was preparing to invade the Soviet Union. And for that invasion, he needed something the German army alone couldn't provide. He needed men willing to kill without hesitation, on a scale the world had never witnessed. That's when Ohlendorf, the economist, the intellectual, the family man, was handed command of Einsatzgruppe D. If you've never heard that name before, you need to, because Einsatzgruppen weren't ordinary military units. They were mobile killing squads, and Ohlendorf's job, to follow behind the advancing German army and eliminate anyone the regime considered an enemy: Jewish civilians, Roma families, political prisoners, the disabled, men, women, children. Here's the part that still shakes historians today. Ohlendorf didn't hide from what he did. He didn't deny it. He didn't even downplay it. At Nuremberg, when asked how many people his unit had killed, he answered with terrifying precision: 90,000. Not many, not some. 90,000, stated the way a company director might report quarterly earnings. And that single moment in the courtroom became one of the most haunting testimonies in the history of war crimes trials. But how does a man go from filing economic reports to commanding mass executions without flinching? What happens inside someone's mind that allows that transformation? That's exactly what we're going to unpack in part 2. The true machinery of the Einsatzgruppen, the psychological walls Ohlendorf built around himself, and the horrifying justification he gave the judges when they asked him one simple question: did you feel guilt? His answer will disturb you more than anything you've heard so far. Did you feel guilt? That question hung in the Nuremberg courtroom like a blade, and Otto Ohlendorf's answer didn't just shock the judges. It exposed something far more terrifying than one man's cruelty. He said no, not defiantly, not angrily, calmly, because in his mind he wasn't a murderer. He was following orders. He was protecting Germany. He truly believed that what he did was necessary. And that belief is exactly what makes his story so important to understand. Let's go back to where the machinery of death actually operated, inside Einsatzgruppe D. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't random violence. It was organized, systematic, almost bureaucratic in its horror. Ohlendorf didn't scream orders like a battlefield commander. He issued directives the way an office manager assigns tasks. Villages were surrounded. Civilians were gathered under false pretenses, told they were being relocated or registered. Then in forests, ravines, and open fields, the killing began. Here's something most people don't know, and it will change how you see this entire story. Ohlendorf actually testified that he tried to make the killings more humane. Stop for a second and let that sink in. He believed that lining people up and shooting them directly, rather than using slower, crueler methods, was somehow an act of mercy. That's not compassion. That's a mind so deeply corrupted by ideology. It had rebuilt the definition of right and wrong from the ground up. But even within this machine of death, cracks appeared. Because these weren't robots pulling triggers, they were human beings. Historical records show many soldiers under Ohlendorf's command suffered mental breakdowns. Alcoholism spiked. Suicides occurred. Even Heinrich Himmler, after witnessing one execution personally, reportedly grew pale and unsteady. If the architects of this horror struggled to stomach it, imagine the psychological toll on the men forced to carry it out daily. And yet Ohlendorf kept precise records, numbers, reports, efficiency percentages. To him, human lives had become statistics in a ledger. This is what historians mean when they describe the banality of evil, a phrase coined by philosopher Hannah Arendt after witnessing a similar Nazi trial. Evil didn't require passion or hatred. It only required obedience and the willingness to stop asking questions. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, one that reveals Ohlendorf wasn't just a killer, but a man torn between two identities. At home, he was reportedly warm with his children. Some accounts even describe him as reserved, almost shy in social settings, a stark contrast to the man commanding mass executions in the East. There are stories, lighter, human moments of awkward dinners with fellow officers, quiet jokes, small attempts at normal family life, even amid the horror surrounding him. It's almost impossible to reconcile. A man capable of ordering the deaths of children while raising his own with apparent affection. That contradiction isn't just disturbing. It's the exact reason his case became so pivotal in war crimes history. By 1942, Ohlendorf was pulled back to a desk job in Berlin, working under the Reich's economic ministry. You'd think distancing himself from the killing fields might trigger guilt, regret, something. It didn't. He simply moved on, as though commanding a genocide were just another completed assignment. But the war was turning, Germany was losing, and soon the men who once believed they were untouchable would face a reckoning they never expected. Because when Allied forces finally captured Ohlendorf in 1945, what happened next inside that interrogation room stunned even seasoned American officers. He didn't beg, he didn't deny anything. Instead, he said something so cold, so calculated, it would go down as one of the most infamous statements in Nuremberg trial history. American officers expected denial. They expected excuses. What they got instead left them speechless. When asked to explain his actions, Otto Ohlendorf reportedly said he had simply been doing his duty, following the laws of his country, just like any soldier would. No remorse, no hesitation, just cold, calculated logic, as if murdering 90,000 people required no more justification than filing paperwork. That single mindset is exactly why his trial became one of the most important in modern history. By 1945, Germany had collapsed. Hitler was dead. The war machine that once seemed unstoppable had crumbled into ruins, and the men responsible for its darkest crimes were being hunted down, one by one. Ohlendorf didn't run. He didn't hide behind a false identity like so many others tried to. He was captured, and almost immediately, he began talking, openly, methodically, describing operations most murderers would have desperately concealed. Why would a man confess so freely to crimes this horrific? Some historians believe Ohlendorf still clung to his ideology even in defeat. He wasn't ashamed of what he'd done. He believed history would eventually vindicate him. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a soldier who had simply followed the terrible logic of his time. That mindset is why the Nuremberg Trials mattered so much, because they weren't just judging one man's actions. They were judging an entire system that had convinced ordinary people mass murder could be duty. In 1947, Ohlendorf stood trial in what's now known as the Einsatzgruppen trial, one of 12 major Nuremberg proceedings following the main tribunal. The evidence against him wasn't circumstantial. It wasn't secondhand. It was his own words, his own reports, his own chilling testimony given without pressure, without torture, without hesitation. He had documented his own guilt more thoroughly than any prosecutor could have. When the verdict came, there was little surprise in the courtroom. Otto Ohlendorf was found guilty of crimes against humanity and war crimes on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. The sentence, death by hanging. But here's the detail most documentaries skip over. Ohlendorf reportedly showed no visible fear when the sentence was read. Some witnesses even described his composure as unsettling, almost detached from the reality of what was about to happen to him. For nearly 3 years, he sat on death row while appeals and political pressures delayed his execution. Some officials even argued for clemency, citing Cold War tensions and Germany's need to rebuild relationships with the West. But for a man responsible for 90,000 deaths, the world simply couldn't look away and forgive. Justice, however delayed, was coming. On June 8, 1951, at Landsberg prison, Otto Ohlendorf was executed by hanging. He was one of the last major Nazi war criminals put to death under Allied authority. Witnesses said his final words carried no apology, no plea for forgiveness. Only a final statement defending the ideology he still believed in, even as the rope was placed around his neck. A man who took 90,000 lives walked to his death still convinced he had done nothing wrong. And that's the most disturbing lesson of Otto Ohlendorf's story. He wasn't a screaming monster. He wasn't uneducated or unstable. He was intelligent, composed, even affectionate with his own family, and yet capable of orchestrating one of history's most horrifying genocidal campaigns. His story forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. How many ordinary people, under the right ideology and the right orders, could become capable of the same? If this video opened your eyes to a side of history rarely explored with this much depth, make sure you're subscribed to X History, because next time, we're uncovering another hidden chapter the world tried to forget, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.